Oh boy, we're in the thick of it now, ladies and gentlemen. Before we get to the outstanding, the exceptional work, which is Nightshade, which stands as the Doctor Who book I've read the most out of everything, we've got one final obstacle to talk about, and that is the conclusion to the Cat's Cradle trilogy, which had no plan or structure in the first place. We have Witchmark by the rather unknown writer Andrew Hunt, and this is Andrew Hunt's only contribution to Doctor Who officially. In 2016 he did publish a piece in the Target for Tommy, which were a collection of Doctor Who fans and authors who were supporting Tommy battling with cancer. A lovely charity book release with a strong message behind it. Those are the only contributions I could find with Andrew Hunt. Now, Witchmark. It's regarded as one of the worst, and I mean one of the worst, new adventures out of the entire series. Quite the statement, isn't it? To be labelled one of the worst. And as well, Andrew Hunt regretted that this went into publication. For what reasons, I do not know. Last minute changes, which he never got to do. I'm not sure what he meant by he regretted this book going to publication, but Andrew Hunt's objective and what he wanted to achieve in this book is to make the characterization of the 7th Doctor and Ace spot on in terms of dialogue. That was one of his objectives. As well, this is one of the rare exceptions where Doctor Who goes more fantasy than science fiction. Something like The Sorcerer's Apprentice, for example, and the Virgin Missing Adventures. This is also set in my home of Wales. So in terms of theme, going for more fantasy, it looks like it stands out within the range. But according to reviewers, it stands out for all the wrong reasons. Reviews are poor. But did this turn out to be a complete U-turn? And did I enjoy it? Well, are the reviews for me true? Let's review book number 7 in the Virgin New Adventures, Cat's Cradle, Witchmark by Andrew Hunt. As mentioned, Witchmark goes for a more fantasy direction than science fiction like Time's Crucible or a dystopian techno-thriller like Warhead. It's really an urban fantasy. The prologue and the introduction establishes this setting of a farm where this family lives and resides, and surrounding them are all sorts of mythological creatures. These creatures are said to have this mark of some sort, whatever that means, and this symbol represented on them, and these characters mention this place called Tura-N-Dash-Og. I know, a really weird name for a planet, and it's going to be pretty jarring to keep pronouncing the name of the planet. And they convey that a type of darkness has consumed this world, and this doomed world has a connection and portal to Earth. Hence, in the cover art, we can see mythological creatures coming through this portal. So it seems defending this war is vital to prevent the catastrophe of what is happening to Tura-N-Dash-Og. Again, I'm going to bloody hate pronouncing this name over and over again. And that arriving to Earth and spread its influence. This reminds me straight out of like the Elder Scrolls franchise, even though Witchmark predates the series. Now, what about this elusive cat, which, again, I'm just going to call this book Witchmark, because there is just so little significance when it comes to this trilogy. Andrew Cartmel and Andrew Hunt just simply wanted to write their own story, so I'll say this straight from the back: Cat's Cradle is just a nothing trilogy. That's the best description one can give Cat's Cradle. It's a nothing trilogy. Look at these books as just standalone ones. Time's Crucible did something, but after that, nah. Warhead does his own thing. Witchmark does its own thing. So as a trilogy, nothing. They really didn't care. And they had nothing to go off regarding this trilogy. It was a last-ditch effort simply because Peter Tuftle Evans liked the name, and that was it. So if you have any like theories buzzing around your head when you're reading the book, it's all just pointless. It just doesn't lead to anything. And I was thinking, does this cat somehow have a connection with these mythological creatures? And it's just a waste of time, because it's just nothing interesting at all. What Cat's Cradle does do is just continue another arc called the Infected TARDIS arc. That's it. That's all that's pretty much interesting. Though the first chapter honestly sets up the story quite well. It's a long chapter compared to most books, or Doctor Who novels per se, but it's fine really. We understand that some accident happened on the M40, which involved a coach bus, and everybody on the bus is dead, and it seems the passengers on the bus have this mark on them, which Inspector Graham Stevens thinks might be something like a religious cult to attempt to logically get some type of answer. What's strange is all the passengers are wearing clothes which are brand new, like they've been taken from the shop with tags and barcodes still attached, which makes it feel like something is deliberately trying to create confusion, which all this is happening in a small Welsh town. He accesses files and records related to the case about the dead passengers, but only the driver is named and the passengers are unknown in terms of identity. It's a cool setup, and the Doctor and Ace are brought up with old friends who knew the Doctor when travelling with Mel, being Hugh and Janet, but old Davy, another friend, is warning about something ancient brewing in the background. What's odd is we see a horse too, with a wound on its head, which was later discovered to be a unicorn spike which was removed, which informs the reader it seems like something wants to cover the identity of these creatures through malicious intentions. So it's a decent start. Nothing remotely brilliant or groundbreaking, nothing terrible either, as highlighted by the many negative reviews which Mark gets. I am at very least invested to see it progress. Moving forward, we're introduced to two American tourists visiting Wales, being Jack Pilgrim and David Gibson. They're kind of jarring characters if I'm honest, but it was kind of the whole point. They come across a wounded centaur near the lake, first mistaking it as a man. This chapter is called Strange Beasts, and when we start to see these creatures come up more often now, and when reported to the police, which Jack and David do, the officer's reaction and how he dealt with the situation was rather strange, as he lit the beast on fire and acted like it was no big deal with what he'd just seen and what he just did. He conveyed in such a normal way that it must have been some sort of laboratory experiment. He wants information from Jack and David about where they will be during the week, and tells them not to utter a word about it, and then simply leaves. And that whole situation that played out to me adds a whole lot more questions, because the officer's actions were simply so odd and weird. And he didn't do the stereotype government cliche of killing them to hide the information. He just warned them not to discuss it, and then just walked off. I might just go right off the bat and just say what I felt about Witchmark, because it's just so hated. I don't hate this book. In fact, I just think it's simply okay. It's nothing groundbreaking, it's nothing brilliant, it's just above average really. That is Witchmark for me, but to hear it just absolutely slated and said to be the worst new adventure, I just personally don't see. I think Genesis is much worse than this, even though it had some good structure to it, but it was just ultimately just horribly written. It's a little bit more interesting than Apocalypse to me, and it was less suffering to read than Time's Crucible, though Time's Crucible was more interesting than this. There's actually not a lot to this novel. It's fairly straightforward and pretty tame for a new adventure. Think about what the new adventures are. More adult themes. This one, yeah, was fairly tame, so it was a surprising but kind of welcome direction for the new adventures. It's just, I wouldn't say it's light-hearted, definitely not. That's pushing it too much, but it's just more tame. Maybe because Warhead just literally comes right before it, which was super dark, super bleak. Gravitas in its writing and its themes and its prose. This one, deals a lot with oppression, absolutely, but more tame. Then we go to the Doctor and Ace, who are discovering that this town, very odd and strange events are happening, and the atmosphere has an unfamiliar sense of something coming, but not having the understanding of what it is and how it's going to manifest. Which the Doctor and Ace soon hear screams, which Janet gives off in the farm, and we see a sheep completely slaughtered, barely alive, and a gigantic wolf making its presence known. So if I go back to the previous chapter, I said a unicorn was found with a wound on its head, and now an officer who had a very strange reaction to a centaur killed it. It seems like these creatures are known to individuals and are killing them for whatever reason. This book reminds me of a number of different stories. It reminds me of it's going to sound rather bad, a less interesting Hollow Men from the PDA range. And if I was to compare Doctor Who stories to this, well, particularly spoiling it, I would compare this more so to the Stones of Blood. I would throw in also a little bit of Galaxy 4 in here too. Those are the stories which makes me think of this one the most. Stones of Blood more so, Galaxy 4, and a less interesting Hollow Men, which is again another 7th Doctor and a story set in like a village. So Witchmark does actually display some wonderful build-up. It's not required, but it's still pretty nice build-up to Nightshade. The Doctor wanted to treat this day at Wales as nothing more than a holiday. Talk to some old friends and that's it. He felt demotivated, which Ace calls out on and says, the one minute you feel like doing nothing and the next it's all systems go. This is where the Doctor falls into this melancholic, nihilistic way of thinking about himself, an identity crisis. His position as a Time Lord, reflecting about the corruption and evil within his own society and upbringing, and how he views himself being shaped by these views. He almost feels demotivated when Ace brings up the cat and about its potential danger, which at the moment is still ambiguous, but again is nothing interesting, believe me. But you do not need to read Witchmark, the Trilogy, or Time Room to get into Nightshade. It simply provides the context and the build-up into Nightshade. And Love and War, of course. Remember, the new adventures are more forgiving than the BBC EDAs in terms of what you want to read in the range. I do recommend you read them in order to fully immerse yourself, but then again that might be the definition of insanity if you want to read the Virgin New Adventures in order as a marathon. Taking big shots at myself there, but maybe I am mad. And maybe you are mad too for reading this range, but it's like a guilty pleasure sort of love, the Virgin New Adventures. One big aspect Andrew Hunt wanted to focus on in this novel, as I said, and achieve, is that he did extensive research and viewing of the 7th Doctor's era, understanding the characteristics of the main characters, and yet it is absolutely nailed. So one of his goals of the novel, I would say he achieves this goal. But I always expect the characterization is good in every Doctor Who novel that I read. In some cases, I believe some books do it to an exceptional level, like Time Room Exodus, Warhead, for example, Nightshade, and here I would say Andrew Hunt did do well with the characterization. Ace being excited about looking at old records of music that speaks to her taste, the Doctor's inner thoughts and mind being ambiguous and alien, not quite understanding him, which sets up again very well to Nightshade. I don't have a problem with the characterization. Andrew Hunt did well with the main characters, did good research. Supporting characters are fine, nothing exceptional, nothing bad, just average, I would say. But yeah, it's an interesting direction I am taking it. I really did not expect this for Witchmark. And will I be in the minority? It seems like I am. Because most people rate this a 3 out of 10, a 4 out of 10, mainly under average, which is flipping poor. But I just about rate it over average. So I'm 100% in the minority, but it's a welcome surprise because I was flipping dreading this novel. Because all I was thinking about is Nightshade, 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 Nightshade. That was all I was thinking about, and I just saw this as just an obstacle in my way. But it turned out more positive than it did negative. In fact, I didn't find anything remotely negative about this novel. It was just simply just an above average read. I even assumed that it was going to be a terrible novel by my thumbnail, which I created months ago. That thumbnail no longer applies now, but I can't be bothered to change it because I look like I'm gonna die in the thumbnail. But no, it was a pleasant surprise. Chapter 4, as illustrated on the cover of the book, is when we go to the planet Tur-N-Dash-Og. I've just realised I've been pronouncing it wrong all this time. It is Tur-N-Dash-Og. That is how you pronounce it. Yeah, I've been saying it wrong this whole time, forgive me. And Hunt does a good job in setting up the feel, the atmosphere of the planet, which I'm just going to call it the planet now. We are first introduced by these weird, malnourished cult members with their leader, Captain Reese, standing around something very similar to Stonehenge. The scene is almost straight out of the Stones of Blood. The vibes of Stones of Blood, even though I find that story super overrated, I really don't like the Stones of Blood. The planet feels bleak, twisted, and most importantly, oppressive. A sinister and corrupt evil has consumed the land and brought forward this darkness that these humanoids have been subjected to. Around them they see these eternal flames with creatures burning and suffering in this unimaginable torture. Reese quickly points out to the Doctor and Ace, who are observing these creatures being torched eternally, that they deserve no sympathy. And these demons are witches that deserve it. And yeah, if you remember, the police officer burned one of the creatures, so I was thinking, is there a connection? Why are they all going after these creatures? Is it something that are they a threat? Is it something to do with this mark per se? They're being torched for a reason. Then we get introduced to an array of characters on the planet with Dyfred, who explains about the sky used to be blue. The creatures and the humanoids lived together, and in an instant some form of evil created chaos and plunged the planet into a place of dread. These creatures being burned around them, this fortress is a reminder that they are motivated by vengeance. Nawada, the general of the humanoid group, seems pretty ruthless in his conquest to purge them completely, that these demons were responsible, and that hundreds of his loyal men were massacred by them. When Dyfred finishes his internal dialogue explaining the events that transpired, the Doctor and Ace are kind of forced into this plan to go north, the source of these creatures. While the Doctor goes with it and encourages Ace to go along with it, Ace still in the back of her mind feels something is off, especially with the feel of oppression around her, that she is yet again having to deal with these people she feels uncertain about, that hide evil in their souls. She gets scared in this novel and looks to the Doctor for reassurance. Hunt did a marvellous balance of fun character moments, which reminds me of their various blooper reels. It feels like I was watching a TV episode, and then the more serious elements which work perfectly together. Solid stuff by Andrew Hunt. Witchmark also involves certain characters which appear in other new adventures. They start out here, and I would only use the word clones to explain them, otherwise I'll just be spoiling it, but they're also in other books. Should I name the books? I'm not going to name the books, but they're in 2 other Virgin New Adventures, but they are first in here, and I don't think they were explained at all. Not very well by Andrew Hunt, and their involvement is minuscule. So I hope that they have more of a role in the other two books, even though one of the books that they're in is virtually plotless. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see about that. But the clones, which I'm referring to, minuscule in this book. But yeah, I admit I made some pretty bad assumptions when it came to this novel. Really low expectations. The biggest complaint people say about it is that it's incredibly dull, or it's a bad attempt at Doctor Who doing fantasy. And it doesn't feel like Doctor Who. Yeah, I could see that. So it's fairly similar criticism to Warhead, that had terrible pattern in some places. But is it dull? I would say that much is probably dull, where you just want to finish with the book. That I actually found enjoyable. Big compliment for the book. That, I was just thinking, I'm personally done with the novel, and now I want to get to Nightshade. That is what I was saying to myself. So is it dull? Towards the end it is. The book then is just finally out of steam. You get it, it's straightforward, there's nothing much to this novel, and you just want to be done with it. Not torturous like Time's Crucible, but you still want to move on, basically. But I would say its star quality was its characterization, as I said, its writing, and at times some wonderful poetic description. It does throw a lot of characters at you, can be quite sudden with how many it throws at you, and you might not like that because some shine more than others initially. But moving forward, the story, when you get into the main bulk of Witchmark, is divided into two different sections. One on the planet Tura-N-Dash-Og, and the Doctor and Ace trying to solve the problems that is happening, that has brought ruin to the planet, and then on Earth, which to me is equally as interesting in my opinion, as it sees that David Gibson, the two American friends, and his friend Jack has been kidnapped. And he seems to be the culprit, as he himself has been witnessed in doing so in a van, kidnapping someone, which then puts the locals like Hugh at odds with him and saying he's spreading nothing but nonsense. So any character who's getting close to finding out about the town and its activity, it seems something happens to them either directly or indirectly, like being framed for something they didn't do to try and cover up what's happening. Eyewitnesses then saw him commit the crime. But the thing is, they're not brainwashed into thinking they saw David commit it. They indeed did see him do it. But it wasn't David himself. It was a complete copy of him. As I said, clones. And then we also see the Doctor and Ace still here on Earth too. And then the same thing with Tura-N-Dash-Og as well. Two different versions of them. So when the chapter called Unwelcoming Visitors ends, pretty chilling. Surprising revelation. I never expected Witchmark to be quite good in some places. Ace for the first time finally expresses and doesn't internalize her anger towards the Doctor of constantly staying put while he works behind the shadows away from her. Staying put while people's lives are in potential danger, she goes against the Doctor's request and goes out. Also what I like, and what many people would appreciate in it, shows a lot of respect to survival. When Ace had the Cheetah People virus, that somehow plays a role in this book, which I quite liked. There's some part of it where it comes to, well, how she connects to these creatures, which I'm not too sure what to think about that. But I do feel like it plays a lot of respect to survival, and when she was under the influence to the Cheetah virus. So thinking about this book more and more, I'm still surprised why it's so hated. But what it definitely fails in the most is that just call it that. Just call it Witchmark. Man, the cat wasn't even significant at all. I've said this again and again and again. Besides being oddly mentioned, and then just a really lazy chapter at the end where Hunt probably thought, how the hell am I going to include this goddamn cat? Alright, I'll do it this way, and that was it. But yeah, with this whole damn Cat's Cradle arc, it was even worse of a structure than Time Realm. There was at least structure to Time Realm, and I prefer the story, the overall story of Time Realm compared to Cat's Cradle, because there's essentially nothing in terms of Cat's Cradle. It's a nothing trilogy, as I said. As a standalone story, yeah, I like this book. I wouldn't say it wraps up very well. It leaves a lot of things hanging, which I don't think were even resolved. So yeah, the last 200 pages, you will think to yourself, yeah, it's getting a little bit, you get fed up with it, really. The 200 pages before, I enjoyed the book. Shocker. Would I call this book underrated? Honestly, I wouldn't go out my way to defend this novel, so to call it underrated, not really. But it doesn't deserve the hate, I don't think. It's definitely not a 3 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10 novel. I just personally don't see that. I think overall, this book was simply alright. Nothing I found particularly bad, but nothing exceptional either. But to reflect on the entire Cat's Cradle trilogy as a whole, Time's Crucible had some brilliant ideas to it, but it failed with execution, and it was one of the most difficult books. It was super convoluted, and it was melting my brain trying to wrap my head around it. It was like putting a jigsaw together, which was constantly just shuffled around. And that is also the prequel to Barrow, which definitely puts it in this light, but it just doesn't stack up. Warhead was ultimately the best book out of the trilogy. It's just my cup of tea. It was dystopian, techno thriller. The prose was very strong, probably the strongest prose out of all the books so far. It was heavily padded, but the themes I love. I know for a fact I'm going to give positive ratings to Warlock and Warchild because they have the same themes. But Witchmark, in terms of a story, it is the weakest. In terms of my level of suffering, I would rate it second, because I enjoyed it a heck of a lot more than Time's Crucible. But then Time's Crucible was so much more richer and had better ideas, but would I read Witchmark again? Yeah, I would read it again. Time's Crucible, I would not read again. So I think that kind of confirms that I would put Witchmark over Time's Crucible. Might be controversial in terms of a ranking, so Time's Crucible is in fact my least favourite out of the trilogy. That's Witchmark. This review felt a lot more quicker than the other reviews I've done. There's simply not too much to this novel. Fairly straightforward, it's not dense at all, and it's fairly tame. While I would rate the Cat's Cradle trilogy, I would rate that a 4 out of 10. Yeah. I rate Time Room a 6 out of 10, and I rate Cat's Cradle 4 out of 10. It's just, it's a nothing trilogy, as I said. Now, we are finally done with Cat's Cradle. And now we're moving to one of the big boys of the Virgin New Adventures. That is, in fact, Nightshade. Of course, there's going to be a positive review. I've read that book multiple times. But since it's been a while of doing a Virgin Misadventure review, I will be reviewing the next Virgin Misadventure before Nightshade. I don't see this book as something like an obstacle in my way like Witchmark. I'm very much looking forward to Nightshade, but I'm kind of feeling like a Virgin Misadventure now. So yeah, the next book review on the channel is going to be Evolution by John Peel. I know the name gives me a bad taste in my mouth, Time Room Genesis, but this isn't Time Room Genesis. I'm looking at Time Room Genesis as its own entity, not just John Peel. But yeah, Evolution is the next book review. And for the new adventures, it is, of course, Nightshade. See you for those 2 book reviews. Have a good one.